Hello, everyone. Welcome to Execution is the Strategy, how leaders achieve maximum results in minimum time. And I am your host, Laura Stack. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. A little bit about me, those of you whom I have not yet met. My company is the Productivity Pro. We're based in Denver, Colorado. And we specialize in business performance, strategy, execution, and employee productivity. Been in business now for 22 years as a speaker, author, and trainer, and have 6 books. This is my 6th. Execution is the Strategy by Barrett Kohler. And I have my little family there. There's my 14-year-old son on the left, Johnny, my husband, John, my daughter, Megan, go CSU. Freshman now, and my 12-year-old son, James. So just like you, I'm trying to hold down a family and a job and a house and pets, and there always seems to be so much to do. And so you taking the time to join me, hopefully I can give you some tips today on how you can save time and execute more effectively. So this is the book site, executionisthestrategy.com, where you can visit and get, there's a sample chapter there, some support videos, all complimentary, some information on some bonuses. If you want to run a book club, there's a leader guide, there's a discussion guide, all kinds of things there to support you in the learning in this webinar. And if you saw in the reminder link, hopefully you saw the link there to executionquotient.com. Perhaps you already took the quiz from the book before you arrived today. So if you have that with you, keep those results handy as we go through the content. And those of you who don't have it, you can certainly take that afterward. We will be, as a bit of a housekeeping item, sending out the recording for this, for those who were unable to attend, or if you just want to watch it again or send it to someone else, feel free to do that. We'll also be sending a PDF of these slides so that you'll have this as a handout, so you don't need to be hurriedly trying to write it down, everything. We'll make sure that you have that afterward. And I know some of you are on this call because it is eligible for HR CI credit. So just as a reminder, you know the drill. You need to be on this call the entire time through the full hour, and in the follow-up email that you'll receive, you'll get instructions on how to get that credit. You'll need to email my office manager, Becca, B-E-C-C-A, at theproductivitypro.com, and her email address will be in that email. And once we confirm you were indeed on the line, you will get that certification number. If you are calling in on your phone, it also helps with any feedback to mute yourself if you're on your phone. And because we have nearly 700 people on this call interested in this topic, I have just decided not to attempt a Q&A. And if you want to ask a question, however, please do. The question box is there for you. I will just be answering questions individually. When you post a question, I know it's you. I have your email address, and I will respond back to you in email. My email address, if you'd rather just write to me directly, is Laura, L-A-U-R-A, at theproductivitypro.com. All right, well, let's get started. You know, just like the old gray mare of legend, strategic execution just ain't what it used to be, right? And this point was repeatedly driven home to me as I conducted interviews for this book. I interviewed clients, I interviewed high-level executives in numerous industries, and for example, John Alberto, I talked with, the Senior VP of HR over at Comb, and he was so funny. He actually started our interview by warning me. He said, I just want you to know that I have a bias on strategic plans. They are a waste of time. That's what he said to me. You prepare a strategic plan, and then you put it on the shelf while the real world passes you by, and when you pull it out, everyone says, we didn't do any of that. And so he's explaining here, and this is right from the text of the book, that they used to do these 5-year strategic plans all the way down to fairly detailed financials. And then after a year or two, it would be surprising if the plan were valid and they shortened it to 3 years, and then the lifespan of their chief marketing officer became about 18 months, and those 3-year strategic plans didn't work either. And now we're going to see a lot of people are updating yearly, quarterly, sometimes with monthly sync sessions. So the execution process is dramatically changing, and how we actually get things done through people and drive our strategic initiatives forward and achieve business growth and results, the process by which we're accomplishing that is really different. And so just to make sure that we are all kind of on the same page, people look at execution and, effective execution versus efficient execution, which, as you know, can be different. So in its most simplistic sense, I define execution as moving from a goal to a check mark. All right, that's it. And so efficient execution then is the shortest distance between a goal and a check mark, and effective execution is the most profitable outcome of the distance between a goal and a check mark. And as you know, efficiency and effectiveness are not always the same thing. So let's make sure that we're all kind of on the same page with regard to some of the terms that I use as we go along here. So a goal is something you want to accomplish within a specific time frame. And this gets kind of confusing because interchangeably some organizations call these strategic objective or strategic priorities or strategic initiatives. Strategies then are those long-term plans or the different ways that we could accomplish a goal. So the strategies are how we might get there, and then the tactics are those short-term actions that we do to actually fulfill a selected strategy. So tactically, operationally, day-to-day, we do things that drive the accomplishment of that strategy, which drives the accomplishment of the goal. So execution then would be the process of moving from the goal to all the way to the end, to the tactic, to the actual check mark. So when you're looking at executing and getting from A to B, and actually let's just make sure you're with me here. I'm just gonna put up a poll and see what you have to say here. So let's launch this poll and see what everybody says. All right, so here we see what is a goal. All right, is everybody here? What is a goal? A, something you want to accomplish within a specific time frame. B, the alternative methods or options you could use to accomplish something. Or C, the short-term actions required to fulfill a selected strategy. All right, let's see what we have up here. Good, 96% of you correctly are saying A. That is absolutely perfect. Okay, so we're back here. I'll share these results with you so you can see what we have here. So a goal is something you want to accomplish within a specific time frame. All right, I'm going to hide these polls again. I like to throw these out here on you, so just to kind of make sure you're with me. So I have a bias personally toward efficiency. This is the big thing everyone is talking about right now. How do we accelerate execution? How do we drive growth more quickly? We're talking about agile. We're talking about efficiency. We're talking about lean. Talking about how to be quick and nimble. How do we take a huge cruise ship and steer it like a small motorboat? And so in many cases, when I come on site and I'm looking at how do we execute, I'm already assuming that people have an effective strategy. In fact, I go in kind of saying, how do we execute on this strategy? What's the shortest distance between the goal and the check mark? And in doing so, there's kind of 4 things that I like to just say are the premises. These are the assumptions that I make about the strategy as we go forward. 4 different things that are typically true or conditions that exist with regard to strategy. So ideally, the strategic plan is kind of this vehicle that continually asks leaders to evaluate the direction of their businesses according to their goals. But it doesn't always happen, as you know, because you probably know yourself, there's barely enough time to stop and take a breath anymore. And some people say that, why implement a tool that's kind of a stale before it's a month old? So today's leaders really lean on their managers and team members, the people on those front lines, to help them make the solid, reliable decisions on how to best execute the objectives that ultimately are going to advance the organizational strategy. Hence why I titled my book, Execution is the Strategy. And it builds on these 4 premises. One is what I call interdependency. And that means that strategy and tactics are part of the same overarching process. Now there's a relationship, but it's all part of the same thing. For example, I was blessed to be the president of the National Speakers Association from 2011 to 2012, and in the 10 years I was on the board, I participated in many, quote, strategic planning sessions, and we board would determine where we thought the association needed to be in 3 years, and we kind of gave the staff its marching orders all the way down to this tactical to-do plan. I mean, we would really get into the weeds with all this detail. And in the following year, the NSA staff members would report what they actually did, which wasn't what we, the board, in our infinite wisdom had dictated. Why? Because they were reacting to opportunities that often weren't even in the plan. Accordingly, they should have. I mean, they were the ones with their feet on the street and their ears to the ground, and so this was perfectly appropriate. And perhaps you've noticed the same thing in your company. Once upon a time, leadership kind of considered strategy and operations to be these separate functions. Sometimes they still do. You still see these, kind of strategy sessions with these outside consultants and week-long kind of cabin-in-the-woods retreats. And operations is still sometimes seen as that downstream piece, and the leaders kind of decide what we want to do, and the troops carry out the wishes. But now the goals, the strategy, the tactics, the execution are all part of this same dynamic process, implementing the long-term priorities through the short-term day-to-day operations. The next premise of strategy going into this is what I call fluidity. And that strategy has to actually be more fluid and flexible in its tactics now than in the past. All right, so as a leader, of course, you still have to clearly articulate the organization strategy. I mean, people need to know what is the definition of success here. But then the strategy and how we're going to accomplish that has to be extremely fluid, so that as the front line, as the team members, as the managers are working, they actually are determining in the moment how best to achieve that. And you'll get great results if you can create this agile culture full of more flexible strategic thinkers. They're still focused on the overall goals and the roles that they play in achieving them, and they're willing to entertain new tactics always for doing so, even with minimal warning. There's just a zigzag. For example, my boys are 12 and 14, as I mentioned, and they play Xbox. One of my clients is blessed to work for Microsoft for many, many years. And as they're online playing Xbox 360, there are Microsoft employees who are also engaged. Can you imagine my son wants to do this, be employed as a gamer. But when someone will type into the chat, a 12-year-old boy, oh gosh, this would be so cool if this, or I wish Microsoft would put this, or the map did this or ended here. People on the other side can react and respond and say, oh, this is a great idea, we need to go this way. So tick, the strategy just kind of shifts, and so it's kind of going up and down in a very dynamic process. And then third, speed. Strategy has to be executed more quickly than ever to be effective, and I hardly need to point out how much faster the business environment is changing today than even just a few years ago. And in response to the speed of change, the strategy continues to evolve faster. You know, it can be out of date before the paper even cools as it's coming off the printer. And so this kind of goal setting that's quick and organic and adaptive is critical. One of my clients over there at Microsoft, Mike Howard, is the Chief Security Officer. And he talks about, you know, how, very openly, how this shift has really happened at Microsoft. You know, a decade ago, they had these 5-year plans, and they mapped those out top-down. And then in the last few years, they've moved to this 1-year plan. And, you know, he maps out priorities and accountabilities and, you know, kind of how they're going to execute year after year, and just updates it on a monthly process. They have that in a sync, they call it a strategy sync meeting every month, and they map out what are the current and the new strategic priorities and how to move forward at the same time. So it's up to the team members to actually execute off that vision, and as they do, the strategy is taking shape. So they see these opportunities, and boom, they move quickly toward the best ones. And the only time the leader, Mike in this case, ever re-engages is if something were going wrong, you know, to kind of guide it back, and it's rarely the case. So they provide this vision, and the team members are go, 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 getting there very quickly. And then the last one, validity. You know, I kind of think, do I even need to point this out? But yes, probably do, that you still have to have a good strategy. I mean, your strategy still has to be appropriate and strong, or none of the other 3 premises are going to matter. I mean, you know, as an author, the demise of Borders Bookstore saddened me, you know. So what happened? Unlike Barnes & Noble, Borders failed to properly account for all the risks that are presented by all the online book distribution. See, it's not that Borders didn't have a strategy. Well, they had a strategy, all right. Theirs was just bad. And the changes were coming, and the writing was on the wall, and the leaders knew that there needed to be a strategic shift. However, they chose a bad strategy. So we have to keep this in mind, because no amount of fast action and speeding quickly in the wrong direction is going to get you out of trouble. So clearly, Borders just, they couldn't be fast enough, and sadly, it stood by and watched as all the other companies kind of nibbled on the edges of its market and shut it down. All right, so those are the 4 premises of strategy. I'm going to put up another poll here, see if everyone is engaged and paying attention. All right, how about which is not one of the 4 premises of strategy? Which one is not? A, interdependency, B, speed, and C, truth. Which one is not one of the 4 premises of strategy? All right, most of you are headed in the right direction here. So we remember our 4 are interdependency, fluidity, speed, and validity. Anybody want to change theirs real fast? All right, so the answer, of course, is C, truth, is not one of the 4 premises of strategy. All right, let me hide this again. And on we go. So the bottom line is pretty simple. There is no shortage of good ideas. You know, everyone talks about innovation and we need good ideas, and I don't really think that's the problem. It's not about who has the best ideas. It's about who executes their ideas the best. And when I asked in your registration link, there was one open-ended question, and a lot of you answered it. Thank you. I asked, what is your greatest strategy execution challenge? And there were some themes in there. I'm just going to read some of them here to you. Not having a plan or knowing where to begin, time management, distractions, keeping the highest priority top of mind at all times, things falling through the cracks, too bogged down with the inbox, planning, prioritizing, organizing. I thought this one was interesting. My resistance to taking action and getting it done, which is a painful process to me. Constant interruptions, which I'm guessing is probably someone in HR, or actually it could be any department. Having a lot of good thoughts and ideas executing them is my challenge. And I think that's exactly the crux of it. I've seen organizations with stellar strategies executed poorly who do not perform as well as those with, it's a mediocre strategy, brilliantly executed, and can achieve even greater results. So the modern business leader's job today is to really listen to the folks who execute, make their work easier. I'm going to talk through that, and continually support them in finding and pursuing new strategies. And as a leader, your titles: disturber, cheerleader, coach, #1 supporter. Those are the hats that you put on, and you're ultimately enabling your team to lead the charge. And, workers have actually been innovating this way for many, many years, but leaders haven't always been good at asking for it or realizing it. Now they're saying, wow, maybe I'll just get out of the way and let them take me where we need to go, and I'll continually adjust upward. And of course, there still has to be a leader to articulate that vision up and down. Leaders still have to set the priorities, and the team members tell them how we're going to get there. And that's what I wrote about in Execution is Strategy. How do we do that? What are the keys to successful execution? And in 22 years now of working with leaders on creating these high-performance cultures, I've identified 4 key factors that must be in place, conditions, if you will, for someone to be able to execute successfully. And without these elements or keys in place, execution can fail, even when it's based on a mature, effective strategy. So the 4 keys to successful execution represent the solutions to these failures and form what I call the LEAD, or LEAD formula. I know, little hokey, but hopefully memorable, that stand for each of the different keys. So the LEAD formula first looks at leverage. Leverage. If you think of the concept of a lever, and we look at how a leader pushes down, the leader is the input force pushing down on the lever, and how we can strengthen those levers, which are our team members, and use the best resources, which could be the fulcrum, to the maximum advantage to move this huge organization, the strength of those strategic priorities, and how strong you are as the leader in pushing down on that input force determines how successfully you can leverage the talent, the time, the resources that you have in the organization. Now, assuming you have the right people and resources in place, the E is the environment. Do you have an environment that allows you to execute this particular strategy? Do you have this agile organizational culture? Do you encourage change? Are your team members hardy? I love that word. Do you empower them to be able to shape the strategy? And if you have the right people and you have the right environment and everyone's engaged and on board, then do you have alignment? Does your team actually know exactly where we're going? Do we understand the mission, why it's important? Do we know how to get there and what we're supposed to do? Do we know how we know when we've arrived? And so is what I'm doing right now going to lead me to the accomplishment of those goals in 6 weeks or 6 months? So if I have the right talent, the right environment, everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing, the D is drive. How fast can we get there? And as a leader, how can you remove obstacles that are in the path, that are slowing them down, that are keeping them from being able to speed up And how do we remove time wasters? How do we add enablers to that so that they can actually move forward quickly? All right, let's put another poll up here and see what you have to say about this. All right, so the next question here, in our leverage model, what represents the input force? In our leverage model, what represents the input force? The leader, the employee, or the organization? Everybody vote for me. A, B, or C is the leader. And if you're still looking at this slide, you can probably cheat. What represents the input force? Good. And those of you who said A, you are exactly correct. When we look at leverage, we have a leader pushing down on that lever, which in the analogy is an employee who is then providing that output force to move that heavy object. All right, let's put another one up here. What does the A stand for in the LEAD formula? What does the A stand for in the LEAD formula? Does it stand for A, action, B, alignment, or C, artificial? I guess if I'm going to give you pop quizzes, I probably shouldn't have the answers up behind me, huh? All right, so we got 100%. Woohoo! Everybody's right on that one. Excellent. And so with each of these keys then, there is a corresponding leadership role that goes along with it. And, you know, if you have a problem in leverage, you know, then we have kind of an engineering hat that we need to put on. You know, we need to build the team. I've had managers tell me point blank, I don't have the people in place to execute this strategy to be where I need to be in 2 years. You know, what does the ideal productive workplace of the future look like in 2 years? And I don't have that. And so then you have a developmental opportunity. You've got a talent or a resource issue. And so if you have your execution quotient assessment with you, you can look at your scores for these 4 keys and see which one is your lowest. Usually people have 1 out of 4 that are lower than the others, or maybe a couple that are low. If the environment turns out to be a weak area for you, the leadership role is in how do we fix it? Looking at yourself more as the mechanic, and the developmental opportunity here are cultural and engagement issues that are keeping people from being able to execute. As you know, unless you've been living in a cave, more engaged employees are more productive. And so can we create that environment that engages them to want to give the discretionary effort to achieve the goals? If you're low in alignment, your leadership role is more like a conductor. You know, how are you doing in that map, that transition between strategy and implementation? Do people actually know from start to finish, from responsibility to strategy to tactic to project to task to action item? How do I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing? So if you're weak there as a leader, you might either A, have not communicated that properly, or you may have a productivity issue. So you want to kind of be the conductor and kind of steer everybody in the right direction. And if drive is your low score, then your leadership role there is more like a bulldozer. We got to knock it down. How do we go faster? How do I clear the way? How do I help my team speed up? How do I develop this agility? And so even if you didn't take the quiz, just quickly to show you what people did when they took it at executionquotient.com. It starts off, of course, with our 4 keys to successful strategic execution: leverage, environment, alignment, drive, as we just covered. And then each of those keys are broken down into 3 component parts. So this conveniently made the 12 chapters of my book. And then each of those chapters then were broken down into 3 modules. So I'll leave this up here a minute just to kind of let you look through this. It's taken me 22 years and countless interviews and hundreds of clients to figure out the 36 different obstacles that can be in the way of you being able to execute effectively. And there, you know, when I come on site to teach this, there's actually a custom link that we send out. You wouldn't use the executionquotient.com. You would get a custom link, and that allows us to have your entire leadership or management team take that assessment and collectively can pull out the data and show to you as a group, here's out of 36 obstacles what your team says is preventing you from being able to execute. All right, so let's pull up another poll here and ask you how many stumbling blocks exist in the LEAD formula. How many possible stumbling blocks exist? A, 4, B, 12, C, 36. Give everybody a minute to click on that. Total possible stumbling blocks. Not just the keys, not the components, but overall the pieces. Good. All right. The C's have it. It is a total of 36, as you are seeing here on your slide. So as we take a look at each of these different elements, obviously I don't know your scores, and so I'm having to kind of be blind here in picking some things based upon that open-ended question that I think might be helpful for each of you. And if you have your scores, you know out of those 36, you can actually pick, you know, the 3, the 5, the 8, depending on, you know, how much time you have that you want to work on. I mean, you can bring these up in a staff meeting. You can work on these in the discussion guide and use this as fodder for further conversation. So if you're low in the leverage key as the overall key, you know, asking yourself, do I have the right people, drivers in place, the talent, the resource issues? The one that I thought I would look at with you today is prioritization. One of the obstacles that get in the way, and productivity, when we fundamentally look at employee productivity and how does business performance gauge that, you can have one employee who works an 8-hour day and another employee who works a 12-hour day. So can the 8-hour day employee be more productive than the 12-hour day employee? Can an 8-hour day employee be more productive than a 12-hour day employee? Yes, you know this is true. You probably know people like this in your workforce. Productivity is not about the number of things you checked off your list, right? What if 2 people had equivalent jobs and equivalent to-do lists? Let's say they make it up an easy day, 10 things. They had 10 things to do, and one person did 3 things on the list, and another person did 7. So can the 3 things done actually be a more productive day than the 7? Absolutely. You probably know this is true. What if they did the 7 unimportant things, who cared, and left the 3 that would have provided tremendous results for the organization? So productivity is about value. It's not about number of hours you were there. It's not about how many things you checked off your list. It's about results and impact and weight and worth, and what is the return on my time, ROT, return on time, for this particular activity. And so my belief is that if we're to be consistently, profitably productive, and we don't want to destroy our health and our joy, we have to abandon unnecessary meetings, emails, tasks, and really reduce the time it takes to handle the rest to focus on the critically important. See, because our to-do lists are more like 117 things, right? And so what are the 17 that we're going to actually do? It doesn't do you any good to do the 100 and leave the 17, and you killed yourself in the process, you know, working 16-hour days. And so when most people are looking at a list of choices, and it's so overwhelming, all the things that they could do at any one moment. You know, when no one's interrupting you, you're not on a call, the phone isn't ringing, you know, you're not, you know, in your email inbox. You literally have this moment in time where you say to yourself, what do I do next? You know that little decision dilemma where you say, okay, what's next? Well, because of the way our environment is right now, I see kind of 5 different things that people are doing with their time. One is they do them by what they feel like doing. All right, so, they look at the list, and a whole lot of people will pick something that's easy or quick or fun because they just want to feel like they did something. Do you get a sense of accomplishment when you check something off? Most people do. We're driven to complete things, and so we check things off all day as quickly as we can, and at the end of the day, what's left? Sometimes it's usually that yucky one, the hard one that was going to require a lot of thought and concentration that we didn't really want to do. Some people do things as they appear. So, for example, do emails come into your inbox in priority order? Of course not, right? But you can sit there in your email inbox all day, right? And handling them as they're coming in fact, if you look at how many emails out of 10 are even important in your life, you would probably agree that a majority of incoming email is not important. But, we check it because, and I'm not sure, if it's because we are hoping it's going to be something more interesting than what we're doing, or because we just can't stand it, we're insatiably curious, or whether it's driven just by a need to be responsive and not miss anything. All right, but obviously as things show up in accounting, what they call first in, first out, not necessarily the most valuable. Some people do them based on who's screaming the loudest, and some people really have the ability to make things seem a lot more urgent and valuable than they really are, correct? And so sometimes by responding to those things based on the squeaky wheel, they learn that works. Another way is as you think of things. So as you're sitting at your desk and you're thinking to yourself, all right, I am going to work on this marketing plan or this proposal or this policy or whatever it is I'm going to do, and you start, and then your brain says to you, hey, did you remember to call Jackie about the meeting next week? And not wanting to forget what you just thought of, you do whatever it is you thought of. You go back to what you were doing, and what do you have to say to yourself? Where was I? Oh, yeah, I was doing this, and you try again, and then your brain goes, hey, did you remember to send back that signed contract on? And you go, oh, geez, I don't want to forget to do that, and off you go. Do some of you do this all day? This is sometimes called multitasking commonly, but basically, of course, things don't pop into your brain in terms of value. And then some people do them what I call by the order of the sticky note. That's just, you scribbled a note here, back of a business card here, and it's randomly saying, oh, geez, I forgot to do that as you pick something up off your desk. So all these ways are clearly not the best way to consider value and how we're going to do those critical tasks and how we pick order. So I like to look at a model that is probably more familiar to some of you by just looking at this sign. You recognize this sign? That's the triage room. Where do we have a triage room? In a hospital, of course. I grew up on the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. My father is a retired colonel, so there was always talk of war and NATO. And my dad used to have an expression with my brothers and I that, hey, soldiers aren't treated in the order they come off the battlefield. And I always hated that, meaning, just because you're standing here, it doesn't mean that your issue is the most important. Soldiers aren't treated in the order they come off the battlefield. And that's exactly what triage nurses are charged with doing. When you walk into the emergency room, you are actually graded or given a number, and this is a very standardized system across healthcare and military, medic, NATO, everything. So a P1, a 1 patient, if you're given that classification, you are not, you're going to die. I mean, it is life or death. And so an example is not breathing. Well, do you have examples of life or death in your work where it is literally drop everything, and at that moment, nothing else exists? All right, this is an emergency, and some of you, have 10 emergencies of the day, whereas a a 2 patient, if you're given a category 2, it can become a crisis if enough time passes. You're not imminently going to die, all right? But what about bleeding? You know, if you continue to have a slow leak, eventually you might die, or, you know, you could actually be bleeding so profusely it's a 1, or if you have chest pain or infection, you know, we don't want to just ignore that. So it's kind of like when we were in school and our professors gave us a term paper to do. My daughter's realizing this, that in September, you know, all of your teachers give you a term paper due December 8th, you know, so when did you do the paper? December 7th, right? And so anything that starts as a category 2, as time passes, by definition, what happens to it? It becomes a 1. It just will by default. So all of those long-term projects that you need to start now that you put off, and all of a sudden it's due in a week and you're just stressing and pulling all-nighters, fall in that category. Category 3 patients, you know, it can become problematic if it's left untreated. You know, let's say you came in, you had a little hairline fracture in one of your bones. Here's the difference with the 3. It will never kill you. There's nothing about this that is actually going to put you down, all right? And so when you look at things that you do at work, many of us are doing the 3s, you know, because eventually someone's going to be unhappy if we don't respond to them, but we're not doing the things that are 1s and 2s, and then we feel so frustrated because we're doing all of these kind of category 3 things. And then last, category 4 patients, just in pain. That's all, just pain. So my boys like Kraft macaroni and cheese. I know, it's the dehydrated kind with the powder. And I did a really stupid trick, this has been about a year now, where I strained the boiling water with the pot lid and missed, and the boiling water went all over my hand, and within 10 seconds, immense pain. So, of course, at 6:30 at night, I rushed over to the urgent care, and I don't know what it was. It was like a full moon, but people just kept coming in ahead of me, and I just wanted some, you know, Silvadine for the pain. But, you know, have you ever gone to the emergency room and they're basically like, okay, go sit over in the corner there, you know, just wait for like 4 hours. And so just because I was there next, it doesn't do me any good as a patient to stamp my feet and go, it's my turn, I was here first, right? Nobody cares if these higher priorities come in above it. And so the 4s in our lives tend to be things that are, you know, human pain management activities. Time wasters, you know, checking our airfare for our next vacation, or looking at our checking accounts, or too much social media. I mean, anything that you're doing really to avoid not doing a 1 or a 2 is usually a 4. And we know when we're in category 4 time, because we talk to ourselves and we say, I really shouldn't be doing this right now, but we still do. So that's kind of one of the things that you can use as a tool to help you triage and think of your office kind of like that emergency room as things are walking through the door. All right, some ideas for E, environment, if you were kind of low here. Do you have the atmosphere, the practices, the culture that allow people to support the strategic priorities? So one of the things that I read in your responses was that, you know, you just have so much to do, you can't say no. You don't know how to set boundaries, how to set limits. Does this fall in? Does this not fall in? You know, here's this huge project list. Okay, I'm not sure how this is all translating into these different priorities. And so one of the things that we cover in that section is setting boundaries and how to be able to push back in a way that is polite, that is assertive. It's not aggressive, okay, but it's from the heart. It's very direct, but it's not passive. It doesn't let people just walk all over you, but it's a subtle way of challenging what the real issue is, or what the true priority is for this particular issue. So for example, stop being so nice to others and mean to yourself. And what do I mean by that? Well, when I was president of NSA, suddenly with 3,000 members, everybody kind of thought of me as their personal consultant and mentor. And I was really challenged by this because I took on the role as a volunteer service role because I wanted to help and I wanted to give back and I cared and I genuinely did want to help people. And they would say, would you look at my brochure, or could you look at my video, or take a look at this? And wanting to help, I would say, yes, hey, I'm going to be on a flight in 2 weeks, and I will be able to do it then, and I will plan. And I actually had people who would complain at me, who would be like, oh, 2 weeks, I need that tomorrow. And I couldn't believe that how demanding some people were. And I envision that sometimes when you get that reaction, that you might actually just go, oh, just do it. And you're just trying to be nice, but in doing so, if I could have literally spent all my time doing everybody else's stuff, and meanwhile, my business would have gone downhill. You can negotiate. When someone says, hey, I need you to do this, when do we assume that they mean it? Usually we assume they mean it right now. And do they sometimes mean now? Sure. But they don't always mean right now. And my office manager, Becca, is really good at this. If I'll, I come in and ask her to do something, and she'll say, do you need that today? Or would Monday be okay? Oh, no, Monday's fine. So a lot of times there either is no deadline, or a deadline is pulled out of the air, or you can challenge that deadline, or you can ask for a compromise. And so one of the things I've learned about saying no is that anytime someone asks me for something, there's always a hidden need underneath it. We have Valentine's Day last week in my son's school, and it just strikes fear in my heart. I go to the classroom for the parent-teacher conferences, and there's this sign-up sheet for this Valentine. I'm thinking, do they still have Valentine's parties in 7th grade? And they want brownies, and so I sign up for that. Fine, I'll do brownies. Now, I don't cook, and so I buy them, and I bring them there. And you know what? Sometimes when you don't cook, you kind of get funny looks from people who brought these, beautiful homemade hearts. And I've learned that, I still have to be true to myself. It's like, look, I don't cook or bake or whatever that would be. Yeah, bake. But I'm happy to pick some brownies up at the store the next time I'm there. And if that's not good enough for them, they will find someone else. But by compromising, I can say, listen, is there something I can buy? Can I bring soda, plates, napkins, forks, right? And figuring out what that underlying need is and how I can actually help. Not assuming deadlines. And I've seen people pull 14-hour days, 16-hour days because they just think that this has to be done before they go home, and it's not always true. Simplifying. How long has it been since you've gone to your internal customers and have asked them, hey, we send you this report every month. Do you look at it? It would be really interesting to send everybody an email the next time you distribute something that you think is valuable and say, hey, if you want this, if you want to continue receiving this, call me. Wouldn't it be interesting to see how many calls you actually get? I've had a newsletter since 1999. It used to be a monthly newsletter, and we had like 75,000 people on it at that time. And I would write a huge article, and there'd be links, there'd be all this great information. I was so proud of this newsletter. And it's been a couple years now. I got the flu, and I could not write the newsletter. I was so sick, and I just told my office manager, you know what, we are going to get so many complaints, but just don't send it this month. I know we're going to hear it. I know there's going to be gnashing of teeth. And guess how many calls we got? Three out of 75,000. And I'm crushed. I'm thinking, I thought everybody loved this, and that's the perfect opportunity to go to people and say, hey, are you really using this? What could I do to change it? And I said, it's great, but it's just so long. It's just so big. I just can't digest it. I just end up filing it and then I never read it. So now we just do a weekly one, and it's just a little, one article, with a few paragraphs, and people really like that one a lot better. So what can you do to kind of simplify? And educate. you know, when people come to you one time and ask you to do something, and out of the kindness of your heart, you do it, now who do they think is responsible for that thing, right? You do something once, and all of a sudden, it's your job. And so sometimes there's a process of re-education that has to go on to help people help themselves, or to learn how to get that done in the future. And just because you said yes to something one time does not mean that you can't say no to it now. And being able to go back and say, I know you've asked me this question 3 times, and here's where you can find the answer to that in the future. Let me help you. And so educating people is helping them get their problem solved, not necessarily by you. Stop being a professional volunteer. Wow, this one has been such a hard lesson for me. I looked at my calendar and realized it was just stuffed to the brim of things that I needed to somehow be in charge of. You know, it wasn't enough just to, you know, do a mastermind group. You have to coordinate the mastermind group. And it's not enough just to have a girls' night out group. You have to lead the girls' night out group. And it's not enough just to be on the board. You have to be in charge of the board. And so I was finding these patterns in my life where I have finally come to the place where it's like, wow, you know what? It's okay to be a participant, to be a member, to be a consultant, to be an advisory person, and to say, hey, I'm happy to give input on that without being part of that committee. If you have questions, please feel free to ask me anything specific, and I'll try to help. And this has just freed up an incredible amount of time in my life. And then lastly, what I call the superhero syndrome. I mean, there is just something that feels good about swooping in and being able to save people. And I'm not saying that don't do those things, but it has to be done in the overall context of what we need to do. And so many cultures, so many environments in organizations that I've worked with just have this kind of pleasing syndrome where, you know, where you're not a team player if you say no, and you know, well, you can't put your do not disturb on your instant messaging because then people can't get a hold of you. And there has to be a balance. I mean, yes, you have to be able to be interrupted sometimes, but there are other times where you need to be able to say, no, I need to work on this. And, you know, people want us to be strategic enablers of business. Well, great. Well, then you have to have time to be strategic. And if your calendar is just one huge blur full of meetings and obligations and appointments, you will never have time to focus on those category 1 and 2 items when you're prioritizing. All right, alignment. If this was your lowest area, alignment. Do your activities on a daily basis move you toward the accomplishment of your overall goal? So again, you either have a communication or a productivity issue here. So we have what we call PROI, I refer to it in the book, your personal return on investment. And in looking at all of the activities that you do, which ones directly support your objectives? And if you made a list of all the things that you do, what are some projects that are just kind of orphans, that don't go anywhere, that don't belong under any of your goals or any of your particular objectives? And we're used to talking about ROI, right? It's profit from a resource minus the investment. So your personal return on investment, what's the company pay in, right? Pay, benefits, vacation, insurance, etc. And so what do you provide in return? If you had expressed this as a ratio, as a percentage of the things that you do, how you actually repay those. My father taught philosophy. I mentioned he was at the academy. This was one of his favorite philosophers, William James, who said, the art of being wise is the art of knowing what to overlook. And I think that there's a really valid point in saying, at some level, not everything on this list is going to get done. And I need assistance determining which of these things actually do not align with what I'm trying to do. And so I have a list of questions here that we use, and you're going to get this out, but I would challenge you in your next staff meeting to ask one of these questions. Or would it be fascinating if you told your manager, hey, I'm going to make a list of the top 3 things I think I'm responsible for, and you list of the top 3 things you think I'm responsible for, and you compare 2 lists? Would they be the same? I love the first question. If I didn't do it at all, would anybody notice? I mean, that is a really darn good productivity question. It's providing ultimate value to our client, or it's just an internal process and it has no value. If we were in an emergency room, activity, walk through the door, would you drop everything? What if you had unlimited? Could you hire someone to do the task? Well, that means that you're not the only one who's uniquely capable of doing that in terms of your personal return on investment. I like this. Does it make you feel like growing up when you're faced with doing it? Or what do you want to do more of that you're not doing? And by looking at all the things that we're spending our time on, is it in alignment with what is achieving that, and what is just falling on the periphery? And how can we look at streamlining or delegating or outsourcing or eliminating things that don't directly align and have very, very little value? And the last one is drive. How can we actually move forward quickly? And one of the things that kept coming up in your comments was distraction. Just can't get done because something is always interrupting me. So there's really what I call the 4 types of distraction. And maybe you can take a look at your results and see which one of these is really kind of your weakest one. Maybe it's technology. Maybe you need to create some rules in your email. If you right-click on someone's email, just right-click on it and say create rule. When I get an email from this person, play a sound. This way you can turn off your rest of your alerts, global alerts, and when you do get one, you know it's from an important person. So maybe you have to look at technology a little bit differently. Maybe it's yourself. Maybe you distract anyone because you're constantly listening to that self-talk in your head. Ooh, don't forget to call. Ooh, don't forget to do this. So instead, don't obey your gut. Don't do what you just thought of. Keep a running notebook next to you that you write down random thoughts, trying to focus, go right back to what you're doing. You get a thought, don't do it. Write it down. Go right back to what you're doing. When you're done, now you have a list of things that you can again treat and compare against your current list of not just doing things in the way you think of them, which of course is priority. Using a skill, maybe people are your biggest problem, just kind of dropping in. We use cubegard.com, C-U-B-E-G-U-A-R-D. It's just our, like, if you think of an airport when the janitors clean and their little gates that go across the doorway, they make those for cube doors. There's billboards and all kinds of funny things on them. But the queue, you can, with your core team, 7 people who typically interrupt you and agree, hey, let's find an hour a day where we can be head down working. And if it's a P1, it's an emergency. If you're just coming to shoot the breeze, the signal lets people know that this is probably not the best time to interrupt you. And then maybe it's your environment. When I go on site to do training, many organizations have the set up so that you're facing a door. That's one of the worst things you can do, because people walk by and they catch your eye and they say, hey, how are you? Boom, you just got a 10-minute interruption you otherwise would have had if you didn't happen to catch their eye, and now you have eye contact and you feel kind of weird. So those are the types: technology, yourself, people, the environment. Which is your biggest distraction? And what is your team's biggest distraction? And putting things in place to help with that. Well, my friends, we've come to the end of this webinar on execution is the strategy. I hope that you have gleaned a couple tips off of those 4 keys to successful execution, the formula, and you can go take that quiz, executionquotient.com, and visit that book site, executionisthestrategy.com, and you can get sample book club materials, the leader guide, the discussion guide to help you in your quest to become more productive and execute effectively. I'm going to leave a slide up here as you leave with some information on getting in touch with me. I'd love to link with you, connect with you on Facebook if you want to subscribe to that now weekly productivity. Welcome to that. Well, closing after 22 years of traveling and doing speaking and training engagements, I was thinking back the other day to the hotel rooms that there never used to be coffee makers in the room. Do you remember this? And now we have these wonderful Keurigs that are in the room. And I can remember the first time there was a coffee maker in the room, so enamored by it. I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my gosh, there's a coffee maker in the room. And I didn't drink coffee then, but I made it. It was so cool. And then nobody expected there would be a coffee maker. When there was, we were happy. Now, today, what's the expectation? That there is a coffee maker. And so you're in fact dissatisfied when there is none. So I've noticed that the bar is continually going up. People are more demanding. They want faster. They send you an email, and 5 minutes later they're calling and asking you to get the email. And it's going to continue to get faster and faster, and the demands are going to get higher. Now's the time we need to get a hand on it and figure out how to meet the expectations of our clients internally and externally and achieve overall organizational goals that move the business forward and pay our salaries without burning ourselves out in the end. Thank you all so much for joining me, and we will send you a follow-up link recording with handout and HRCI certification information for those of you who want it. And my email again is Laura@Productivity if you have any questions. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. Make it a productive day.